Hello, thank you for joining us. Today we have once again one of our very favorites, Pastor Siri Strommen from Atonement Lutheran Church in Bloomington, Minnesota. Welcome, Siri.
Good to be here as always.
So today, kind of a lot to unpack, but Siri is reading a book that I read a while back and hope I retain some of the information, which is When God Was a Woman. And I am actually almost finished with a book called Magdalene Mysteries by Saren Bertrand and her husband, whose name I can't remember now. It's called Magdalene Mysteries, The Left-Hand Path of the Feminine Christ by Saren Bertrand and Azra Bertrand. And we wanted to discuss this because there is obviously a lot happening, a huge shift going on in humanity. My personal belief, and let me emphasize, it's all our personal belief.
Yeah.
Even people, I was having a discussion with someone the other day and they were like, well, I believe in the Bible and this is what the Bible says. And I get that. I was one of those people. But if you research the history of the Bible, how much of that is actually factually based? And the truth is, it's like I said to her, you can't prove me wrong. I can't prove you wrong. So how about we all just kind of maybe take a step back, take a breath, and ask ourselves why we need to so vehemently defend the beliefs that we've been taught to believe are true. Because that's really the bottom line. We have been taught to believe this is true. We were born into this belief system. The people around us believed it. So we took it as fact. Though some of us, and I'm seeing more and more that it's female, which makes sense to me, are saying, how true is this? Is there another way to look at things? And there is a lot of historical facts and research done to affirm that actually God was a woman at one time. We did worship a female deity. And so many people that have near-death experiences and cross over say their experience is more of a feminine God. I personally believe God is feminine, masculine, neither and both. Yeah. I think it's just a way that helps us identify. But where I feel humanity has really run the train off the tracks in the patriarchal religious belief systems that completely negate female spirituality, any female Godhead or divine creator as a helpmate, a handmaiden, a servant, which is very convenient for the males that put the Bible and the traditional Christianity as we know it today together. But as Siri, I'm sure you knew long before you started reading this book, but in the book, I'm not great at retaining facts. Siri is, which is why it's good she's here. I understand concepts more than the specifics, but what I do understand is thousands and thousands of years, even before Jesus, female deities were worshipped. Many excavation sites come up with these idols that are like 50,000 years old that are absolutely female. They have pregnant bellies. They have breasts. They're the life givers. And I know this is really scary stuff when you are enmeshed in the belief system that you have been trained to believe is true. I know because I've gone through it. That's one of the biggest reasons I wanted to do this podcast. Aside from, I just want to spotlight all the amazing things that women have done, are doing, and continue to do. But when I started this journey, I was in my mid-30s. This was a while ago. 30s. And there wasn't a lot around. You could find stuff, but certainly we didn't really have much on the internet or anything for alternative ways of believing, for ways to be able to identify with I'm going to use the word God, not my favorite word, but we'll just say it just because people know what you're talking about then. A God that was only male, that had a son who only had male disciples, and really females are just footnotes in this Bible when if you research the history of how and why the Bible was put together, it makes perfect sense why it's a very patriarchal tome, because it was put together by men in a patriarchal time, which, by the way, was hundreds of years after all the incidents they're describing, except for obviously the Old Testament. But, you know, if an accident happened a month ago and people came around and asked all the witnesses what they saw, you'd get so many different stories. And that's just a month later. So hundreds of years later, to take this one book that was put together with an agenda. I'm not saying there's not good things in there. I think there's some very good things in there, but it was put together with an agenda, and certainly to eliminate any association of divine feminine, of Mary Magdalene being not only a partner, a wife, of Jesus, but an equal, treating her like an equal, giving her the same kind of power that he had to lead and to perform spiritual feats or share spiritual ideas, thoughts, beliefs, whatever. And that didn't go over good. Look at what's happening now with patriarchy, and women are a lot more evolved than they were back then. And patriarchy, man, is it grabbing hold of us and saying, this is not going to happen. Nope, we're not. We're sticking with the old. And I get it, because when people are scared, and we're being fed a steady diet of fear, make no mistake about that, because when you keep people afraid, you can control them. So the media from all angles, fear, fear, fear. Our kids are playing scary video games. Movies are scary. News is scary. It's stay afraid, stay afraid, stay afraid, because then we're controllable. And then people who are pulling the strings and filling their pockets with money that we're giving them so they'll keep us safe will keep doing what they're doing. They don't want us awakened. They don't want us questioning what we've been told for centuries is true. And they want, and isn't it so interesting, isn't it, that women are almost always the targets of the legislation that's being passed over our bodies, over our rights. There's a reason for that. Now, in this Magdalene Mysteries that I'm reading, what I find so fascinating, and I'm sure, Siri, you've probably found this in When God Was a Woman as well, but so many things that were associated with the divine feminine as sacred, as powerful, were turned into evil, were turned into the devil. And so many practices that we practice even today, to some extent, actually have their roots in divine feminine respect and worship, but we've changed all that. And I just want to touch on a few, and then I'd like you to kind of share your input. And one is blood sacrifice. What's really interesting is female sexuality, sensuality, back in the day by the high priestesses, the goddesses, it was empowering, it was freeing. There was absolutely no shame in it. Men would come to these priestesses and the females for sexual healing, and there was orgiastic joy and celebration of our bodies and the power in our life-giving wombs. And that's all been turned into something shameful. Menstrual blood was seen as something very powerful, because it's a life-giving source, right? As it flows. And the practice of using menstrual blood in certain rites, ceremonies, spell casting, which freaks everybody out, but let's say that, whatever, was very respected. And what's interesting is the sacrifices, like in the time of Jesus, even still, you hear about, they would sacrifice a lamb for the blood, mixing up the fact that it's not the blood itself, it was the menstrual blood coming from the women that had the power and sacredness in it. But they replaced that thinking it's just the blood. We'll just use an animal's blood. It's not the same. It's the same thing. I believe, these are my beliefs. You can't prove me wrong. I can't prove you wrong. But I do believe that's why sexual assault is so prevalent, because I believe back, somewhere along the line, some males were like, these women have this sexual power within them, and we go to them for sexual healing, for healing of all kinds of maladies. Let's just rape them and we can take the power.
Mhm.
But the thing they didn't get is you can't take that power from a woman. It's hers to give freely, but it can't be stolen. You can't take her virginity. She can't lose it. Any of those phrases that, and I don't believe that there are really people that consciously think rape is a way for them to extract power from a woman. But people who study these things do say it's not a sexual act. It's an act of power. They want to be powerful over. So I think it's that really deep underlying jealousy
Mhm.
that, or desire for the same kind of power. The other thing is the fact that in this story that we get from Christianity's Bible, modern Christianity's Bible, is that Adam was made first and then Eve was made from his body, which is really interesting that this is the only time throughout humanity's history that a man gave birth to a woman.
Mhm.
Interesting, isn't it? Why would whoever created this universe start it out that way and then flip it? Or is it possible that that too is just a story? And the birther of humanity was actually the feminine face of God and not the masculine.
Mhm.
Again, I understand if you're very vested in what you've been trained to believe is true, as I was. And when these things start coming up and you start examining and researching the history of it, and you're like, wait a second, this can't be true, or this is kind of hypocritical, or this doesn't make sense, it can be very scary, which is why on this platform, we like to discuss new ways. I do believe humanity is rebirthing a whole new way of existing on this planet, a much truer way, a much more powerful, empowered way. But just like when you give birth to a child, it hurts. It hurts. And there's a lot of screaming, a lot of denial. When I went in to have my second kid, they got me all settled in the bed and I remembered what was coming and I begged my husband to take me home. I'm like, I changed my mind, forget it, get me out of here because I did not want to do it. And there's times now when I see what's going on with humanity, and I am of the belief system that we are volunteers here. We sign up for it to experience these different things, where I've been like, I changed my mind. I don't want to do it. Get me out of here. It's too crazy, especially after the Supreme Court decision last week, where pretty much they turned the president into a king. It can get to be a lot, but I think it can also be a good thing because in unprecedented times, maybe we will start looking for different answers, unusual answers. There's people that are going to cling to the past because it's familiar and they're scared and they want someone telling them what to do and what to believe. And that there's a God in the sky that is going to get vengeance on their enemies and punish the bad people. I get
Mhm.
that. I respect that. What I
Mhm.
don't respect is the need that's fed to them that they then demonstrate to make us all believe what they believe, which is Christian nationalism, which is something I want nothing to do with.
Mhm.
So I guess if you're someone who is completely enmeshed in the patriarchal religion and Christianity and traditionally the way it's been taught, it's okay. If that brings you peace and comfort, good for you, because those are rare commodities these days. And whatever buoy you can grab to hang on to keep from drowning, God bless you. However, I would ask you to examine your need to get everyone to believe what you believe, because you're told it comes from a good place. You want to save people. You want to save people. Save them from what? What you've been taught to believe is true, but does not really have any factual evidence, except for a book that was written thousands of years ago by Constantine and all his cohorts because there was a certain agenda. So that's all I'm asking. I'm not asking you to believe what I believe, and I'm going to force it on you. I'm open to discussion of different ways of seeing and believing. What I'm asking you is to stop trying to force others to believe what you believe just because it's the way it's always been and always been taught. We thought the earth was flat at one time too. Of course, a lot of people still do, but and what are you gonna do? But anyway, so that's kind of my jumping off point here with my book, which was the Magdalene Mysteries. And Siri, if you want to jump in with what you're discovering with your book you were reading called When God Was a Woman.
Yeah. So, I've been a Lutheran pastor for 18 years and went to seminary. And it's interesting because it's always been out in the open, at least in my tradition, that the Bible is patriarchal. And I always had like really good teachers who'd point out the parts that were subversive, the parts that were radical. And I've discovered even more myself, especially reading the Gospels and learning about the culture a little bit, exactly how subversive the actions and words of Jesus really were, that he did not buy into what the rest of the culture was doing. And that to me is so important. It's literally what keeps me doing what I'm doing. That the original person, this man named Yeshua of Nazareth, was such a compassionate, evolved human being who saw through so much of the junk that he drew people to him, and something spawned after that. And now what spawned after him, he had no control over, but that there was this beautiful root. And I do believe, there was this person, Mary Magdalene, who was probably more powerful than what the book made her out to be. The book made her out to be the Gospels, and then she virtually disappears after the Gospels. She's there, but there's so much more evidence that she was probably more seen as a more powerful figure in that first century than we know her to be now. So that being said, reading this book When God Was a Woman was really infuriating, because to me, what I'd always heard was, well, of course the Bible talks about God as a man and has like, it's all about the men, right? With women playing side characters, because it was a patriarchal time. And this book sort of deflates that myth and says, actually, no. Actually, we were coming off of a time that was deeply women led for thousands of years, and not just in one area, but like all over. There were priestesses in the temple, and the temple was the center of everything. And people came, and I love this idea. I'd never heard this before, that there was actually a time when people didn't really understand how men participated in the creation of a child. A woman would just get pregnant.
Right.
And because a woman had that power to just somehow make a baby and birth it and nourish it, then of course the child, it was a matrilinear, meaning the line of your ancestry went through the mother. And it makes sense. I mean, that who your mom is 100% of the time because you came out of her, right? You don't know who your dad was. And so think of that. There was no such thing as a bastard. That is an invented word that comes from a patrilinear perspective. But there was no such thing as a bastard, and women had sexual autonomy. It didn't matter about keeping virginity and because they were in charge of their own bodies. So that was sort of the widespread thing. And it didn't mean, as one person pointed out, they said, well, was it just flip-flop where women were oppressing men? And it doesn't sound like that. There were a lot of women in power, and they may have held some of the highest powers, but men also had positions in power, but they on the whole saw women as bearers of life. And if God therefore is the original source bearer of life, then women were these archetypal bearers of life. And so there was sort of a kind of a respectful understanding of that role. Now what happened was there started to be almost this infiltration of thought of like, no, men should be in charge, God should be a man. But it was such a, how do you change a culture? It takes a long time. And so part of it, and Merlin Stone writes in the book, that a lot of the Hebrew Levitical priests sort of were the ones who were carrying the torch of the maleness. They were the ones that really truly had the agenda, but they had so much power to create laws. They had so much power in that by design, they made it that their priestly role was that powerful. And so they made all of these laws that demoted women, took away their right to inherit, took away bodily autonomy, started introducing words like prostitute and slut and shame and bastard and like all of these things, and like murder for the woman who had sexual autonomy, but not for the men. So all the double standards that we've inherited in rape culture and all of this stuff we've inherited, comes back from this. And it was also interesting for her to say how much pushback there was within the Hebrew culture themselves. So the Jewish people themselves were still like, yeah, I'll worship Yahweh, but I'm also going to worship, Astarte, the goddess, because our people have for literally thousands of years. And that it was to this every time there were calls of idolatry and don't be the whore running away from your husband God, that are deeply disturbing parts of the Bible and the Old Testament. The prophets will come and use the words of Israel being a whore, which I've always thought was disgusting, always disgusting. But never did I realize that specifically what they were warning against was the goddess, which just makes me so angry that it wasn't a threat in general. Spiritually, it wasn't a threat. It was a threat to power. And that's what breaks my heart. And you can see that happening in general. That happens in Christianity, where there have been leadership that have cared more about power than spirituality. And so things that they see as being a threat to their power, they will name evil and bad and demonize and say it's a spiritual threat, even though it's not. And that would be like all the witch burnings. And there's just so many ways in which the other has been demonized and we've been made to be afraid of it. And so, and then along comes this person of Jesus who is such a well-rounded person with a lot of beautiful feminine attributes to him, who's not a power person, not a control person. And I believe those first few generations of the Christian church were wrestling with that identity of what he was offering, and yet what this culture that had become increasingly patriarchal was stating was the truth. And eventually the one took over the other. And we have this deeply patriarchal church, which now so many women in and out of the church are waking up and going, learning about Mary Magdalene and just looking back at some other roots and going, wait a minute. We say this is the word of God, but what does that mean? And who said it's the word of God? And can there be good, inspiring things in there? And how do we reconcile that with just like awful, horrific stories of genocide, like straight up genocide in the name of God? If you believe God was saying that and have a justification for that, then that is definitely a belief that God is demonic, pure and simple. Because how do you justify that? And the only way I can say that is what they believed. That is what they thought. That was their agenda and their journey and their time, but that does not hold up over time. It absolutely does not. So the last thing I'll say about this, I could keep talking and going, but one of the things I think is like, why was I not taught this? Why is this not out there? Why aren't people talking about why, if this book was published in 1971, along with others, like The Chalice and the Blade, and I mean, there's other books that have been written. Why did my professors not read it, my almost all male professors, and talk about it even just a little bit? And the best answer that she even mentions in the book is it's just when you're not trained to see something as important and you're taught this is the story and anything else isn't really important, you literally think that that's the reality and you're going to see what you're expecting to see. I mean, years ago, I went to meet my sister-in-law for dinner. And for some reason in my head, we made reservations. For some reason in my head, I knew I was going to be there first. I absolutely had it in my head that I was going to be there first. So I walked up to the front. I told them that I was here for the reservation, and they brought me to a table. And I saw a bunch of little 2-person tables, and most of them were filled. And they said, "There's your spot." And I looked, and there wasn't an empty spot. And I kept going, "Where?" And they're like, "Well, right there." Like on the third time, I noticed to see my sister-in-law was already there sitting, and we were 5 feet from her. They were pointing to her, and I did not see her because in my brain, I was so convinced that I was going to be there first. And that has been such a fascinating lesson of human behavior in our ability to miss literally what's in front of us because our brain is so fixated on something else. And so we have had our brain fixed on viewing the lens where the male is the norm, the male is the archetype, the male is the one in power. It's been so normalized and backed by religion for so long that anything that says different feels uncomfortable. It feels awkward. It can even feel blasphemous, depending on what we're talking about. But I have to say that God is bigger than the Bible. God is bigger than any religion. And so if we want to equate God with the Bible, yeah, this is going to be devastating news. And atheists have been created from this kind of information. But for me, it's not the same. God has always been bigger than any religion and any expression. And so I can read a book like this and it pisses me the hell off. But
Yeah,
I
I
know
hear you on that.
they're not the same, right?
Yeah, I definitely hear you on that. And people are always like, "Oh my God, Mary, when are you gonna let this go?" Like it's all you. But I'm like, I get like you, like, how is everybody just kind of going along with this and ignoring all this evidence? Not just the evidence, but look at us as humanity. Are we a happy, joyful,
Right.
prosperous people? No, no, we are not. So if you are someone who is thinking maybe there's a different way, if, like I said, if you're happy in your traditional patriarchal or religious ways, go for it. But if you're seeking, if your soul is starting to ask some questions, there's a lot of answers there right under our noses. But as Siri said, we're not trained to see them. There's this exercise. I think I did this with you once before, Siri, but I want to do this just for anyone who's listening who's never seen this. So I say to you, Siri, I say, look around your room that you're in right now and look for everything that's red.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, just take a minute for that. Okay. All right, you seeing it? All right, now close your eyes. Now tell me everything you saw that was green. And it's
Right.
much more challenging, right? Because you weren't
Yeah.
looking for it. And that's the bottom line with all of this. There is
Yep.
so much information out there, so much right under our noses, but we were trained to ignore it. Why do you think they call it blind faith? They want us blind. They to not ask questions, to not say, this doesn't really make sense to me, is rewarded. It's the mystery of God. Like it's like the Wizard of Oz. Don't look behind the curtain. Don't look behind there. Just believe what we're selling. So there's a couple of things that came up that you brought up that kind of made me think about some things. One is I think the last time we talked was about trad wives and that
Yeah. Yeah.
Patriots and all that, or the Kansas City Chiefs he was from. But anyway, and there were people that commented on it, and this one man just hardcore Bible, this. But what's interesting is, so the name of the podcast is Heroines and Heretics. It
Mm-hmm.
came to me in the middle of the night, and I almost changed it because it felt a little too in your face. And I still sometimes get caught up in that spirituality is supposed to be love and light, love and light. That's not me. That's not the road I'm being led down. Led down. I'm all for love and light, but that's not the only route.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, then I looked up the definition of heretics and I was like, oh, I'm 100% a heretic. Someone who doesn't believe in the dogma of traditional religion. There you go. So anyway, it was like, the second name in your podcast is certainly accurate. And I was like, it is. Yes, I chose it
Thank
intentionally.
you.
Thank you very much. Jesus
Astute of you,
was a
sir.
heretic. Yes, Jesus was a heretic. Joan of Arc was a heretic. Anybody who's ever stood in front of the church and said, I don't believe any of this,
Mhm.
they're heretics. So anyone who's ever made any kind of change is called a heretic. And here's the thing that I was thinking of, the difference. So what I discovered, believed to be true, in my study down this new path, or whatever revelations have come to me, and that is, the divine feminine is all about sovereignty. To be sovereign.
Yes.
And the thing is, this does not go counter to Jesus's teachings, because Jesus taught that the kingdom of heaven is within. Did I not say, ye are gods? What I have done, greater things you will do. So all this, it doesn't go against Jesus's teaching. It goes against the programming of the church, who wants to keep you small and them rich and powerful. But it does not go against Jesus's teaching. So Christianity, from what I've gathered from a lifetime of it, is it teaches dependence on God. It's dependence. It's very different. Divine feminine is sovereign. Uh, 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 self-reliance, being responsible for your own thoughts, words, actions, creations. And the traditional patriarchal religion is all dependence on God, and it's out of my hands, I am powerless. And there's a gray area in between there that I don't understand. Maybe other people understand it better than me. I've never heard a explanation that is 100% accurate, and I think that's how it should be. Because like I said, I can't prove you wrong, you can't prove me wrong. But I do believe there is some kind of a divine plan. I do believe there is a divine source. But I also believe that we have a lot more power than we've been trained to believe. Because if we now break free out of this traditional patriarchal Christianity and start actually opening up to the fact that the divine feminine, there may be a feminine face of God, and it may be quite different than what we've been trained to believe, we may start remembering our own power, because that's what she's about. She's all about being sovereign. And I'm sure the true divine masculine face of God is as well, but that's, the truth has all been buried, and we've just been fed this very patriarchal God. The other thing I want to touch on that we kind of mentioned before, but this is really an important one, and that is the sexuality part.
Yeah.
I shared with this once before. I don't share it often because it sounds so crazy, but when I was in Mount Shasta a couple of years ago, I was on this divine feminine retreat, and every day we wore a different color. If we were honoring Bridget, we would wear green, or the Mother Mary white, whatever. And on the day of Mary Magdalene, I didn't have anything red. And another woman on the retreat gave me this red apron that's kind of like what belly dancers wear. It had the coins on it. It's actually very cool. And I never given any of this any thought. That's the important thing. Not any of this. I definitely had given the feminine face of God thought, but certainly not the connection between sexuality, female empowerment, female healing, the power of our healing coming through sexuality. None of that. I put this red apron on the day of Mary Magdalene, because that's her color, which signifies the blood. That is so powerful. And I felt this surge in my loins. I was like, honestly, I was like, if I was a guy, I would have like a giant boner right now. Like,
Yeah.
what is this? And I didn't really understand what was happening. I just knew, I was like, this is so bizarre. What is this? And all the way home, I was traveling home with women in the airport. I'm like, can you see anything? Like, like this light emitting from my vagina or something. And in the 2 years since then, I've been seeing that this was the beginning of my waking up to the dormant sexual power of the divine feminine that's in me, that's in all of us. But we have been so well trained to be ashamed of our sexuality. like you said, whore, slut, even the C word. I don't know if I'm going to get beeped. I don't mind saying it, but I don't know if I can say it on this platform. Those were all co-opted. None of those words were bad words. They were all, the female vagina was looked at as the birthing center of everything. So much art, ancient art revolves around the vulva and the womb and it's called the yoni in tantric and it's amazing how programming can make you ashamed of something that was meant to be celebrated, that empowers us. These women that had these temples that were healing temples where people came to for sexual healing and erotic dancing and joy, and there was absolutely no shame in it. There was one other thing that made me think of this. Oh, here's one thing that I want to share with you. Female sexuality being something that we're taught to be ashamed of is the biggest lie that's ever been sold. It makes sense though, because so much of our power is attached to it. And I shared this once before a long time ago. I don't remember it verbatim, but I was doing a meditation once and it was about this sexuality, female empowerment. And they said, whatever came to me was basically, if you sexually assault a woman, she will give up her power all on her own because she will see her sexuality as something that betrayed her, something that caused her pain, and she'll stuff it down with food, with drugs, with alcohol, with promiscuousness, with being frigid and not wanting sex at all. So, and I'm not saying anyone alive today is consciously aware of this, but I do believe these are the roots of sexual assault is so accepted in our society. It's insane. It's insane that 1 in 3, I think it's more women experience some form of sexual assault, and very rarely does anything happen to the men. This was one little thing I came up, and it always, not always, but very often seems to be connected to religious leaders. So this Pastor Robert Morris, when he was a 21-year-old husband and father, traveled the country telling young people about Jesus. He stayed at a house with a 12-year-old girl and had her climb in bed with him and sexually assaulted her. So, you know, in light of Me Too movement or whatever, you know, and this is what happens. This isn't bullshit. It's just, it gets buried because how else do you function? You know,
Yeah.
and once someone gives you permission to talk about it, or you're strong enough as an adult now for it to rise so you can deal with it. That's why these kind of things happen. But anyway, here's the part that I wanted to talk about. So he fought it, but he didn't say he didn't do it. He just said it was a lapse, even though it went on for 5 years. It was a momentary lapse in his spiritual development. What a bunch of BS. But anyway, his lawyer, this is his lawyer, said it was your client. We're talking about a 12-year-old girl. It was your client who initiated inappropriate behavior by coming into my client's bed, which my client should not have allowed to happen. She let him take a little, like he shouldn't allow it to happen. But so basically this little 12-year-old, it's her fault because she got into bed with him, which I'm sure he had nothing to do with luring her there, which of course it tells you it does. But this is all part and parcel of the blaming. As soon as a woman comes out, she's a gold digger, she's a whore. There's still honor killings in many parts of the world. If women get raped, they bring dishonor on their family. We punish them. We are so well trained to be embarrassed of our sexuality, ashamed of our sexuality, take responsibility for our own sexual assaults. And what it does is it keeps us divorced from our feminine power of sexuality. And I'll tell you something else with this obsession with youth and beauty. Something else that became very clear to me is older women were revered, that in these temples, people wanted to be with the older women because of the experience. They had so much more power in their healing. And what have we turned into? Older women, who wants to have sex with them? Oh, so disgusting. It's all youth and beauty, youth and beauty, youth and beauty. Not to say it. I enjoyed being young and beautiful as much as anyone else did. But all these things that we're trained to believe are true or just the way it is, if you start peeling away the onion, you look at it and go, holy shit, we've been had.
Oh, 100%. And yeah, I mean, there's so much that you said there that I wanted to jump in and just keep commenting because it's so rich. I felt the same thing, like in my sense of sexuality. Now that I'm in my 40s, I feel like taking away some of the prudeness and just sort of feeling kind of energy around that as being tied into my creativity and my spirituality. And I look back and I could see how there was always in my life a connection between, call it the sacral chakra, which is in your womb center. Without me knowing anything about chakras, there was a connection between my creativity and my music and sensuality and spirituality. It was always there, and I was always attracted to the concept of God as lover. To me, that was always so interesting, that idea of having like the most gorgeous lover who like knows everything about you, and you just gaze into each other's eyes and you feel so safe. That always attracted me. Um, so years ago, I was on the yoga mat and I was being led into a surrender posture. And as I went in this posture, and I'd always hated that word surrender because to me it meant submission to like close your mouth, close your brain, do what you're told, which my soul just naturally reacted against, just absolutely not. And so I was leery going into this pose, but then all of a sudden in my head was this lover character who just knelt down and grinned this devilish little grin and said, "If you surrender to me, we're going to have a lot of fun together."
I love it.
And it made me realize that surrender to God in the real form acknowledges your sovereignty, because God's not an asshole. And God created you uniquely and wants you empowered. When you're fully activated all the way up and down, you use your power in the most beautiful way. And you do amazing things in this world. And what we need more than anything in this world are billions of people who are laughing and enjoying life and fully activated and doing the work they want to do and relating to people well and binding themselves up. The power we're seeing used now in today's world comes from a very disconnected place, disconnected from heart, disconnected from body, disconnected from earth, disconnected from each other. It's very egoic and very self-served, and it's that toxic masculinity, not to be confused with masculinity, toxic masculinity. And one of the ways that I think we need to balance that is by rediscovering the femininity, healing the femininity, and finding that yin and yang again in a healthy way. And for women, I think part of that is realizing that God wants you to be sovereign as a co-creator with God. You are get to work with God. And it's also surrender at the same time. Sovereignty and surrender in the healthiest forms are just two sides of the same coin. When I surrender to God, God empowers me to be more me. That is the beautiful thing. And when I'm not surrendered to God, I'm just, my ego is taking over, and I'm separating myself, and I'm trying to force something. And it's not me. It's not the real me. But when I'm in touch and in tune with God and in alignment with God, I'm a completely different person, and that person's not going to hurt anything. That person's here to do medicine and beautiful things with that power. So we need to sort of redeem words like power. And as women, we can explore that beauty of that connection with our sexuality and with creativity and with power and with spirituality. Like thinking and talking about God and spirits and orgasms, these are not like antithesis of each other. It's all part of this big beautiful world that God created. And why would God ever be ashamed or give us this amazing gift that can be so beautiful and powerful, and then want us to be ashamed of it? And you know that's a human creation. We've definitely created a story that runs very deep around sexuality that's been harmful for both of us. It's been harmful for all of us.
Yes, I do agree. But most especially, it's been a very effective way of divorcing women from their innate power.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, One thing I do want to add, and I like that you said that co-creator. That's very true, because that's exactly what I am coming to believe as well. If you are someone who is enmeshed in traditional patriarchal religion and you're satisfied and happy with it, but this conversation is making you mad, I ask you why. Ask yourself why. That's what I had to do, because I'm telling you, I was you. Oh my God, was I in Catholicism? Catholicism was everything. That was my life. I taught it. I lived it. I breathed it. I went to church every day. I went to confession, said my rosaries. Came from a good place, but letting go of it was terrifying. My hope is there is such a huge shift going on. It won't be so scary for people who are maybe looking for a different way, who that doesn't make sense for anymore. And if you are enmeshed in the traditional religions, I ask you to ask yourself why you need everyone to believe what you believe. Nothing can be proven. You can beat people over the head with the Bible as much as you want, but I also ask you to research some history of how that Bible was put together, why you believe what you believe. They believe the same thing. Their religion is their religion. That's not a problem for anybody unless you decide everyone has to believe what you believe. And again, nobody can prove anything. We have some history. When people dive into history, they can pull up some facts and some evidence that show that maybe we've been led down a path that isn't necessarily 100% the truth. And I don't believe we'll ever have 100% the truth. I don't think our bodies can contain it. As a matter of fact, in a lot of
No.
meditations, and so many people who have near-death experiences say, they're like, I have so many questions. And they're like, we'll answer any question you want, but you won't be able to remember it because you can't hold all that information and continue to function on this planet as a person. The other thing I do want to say is I've been studying near-death experiences since I was a teenager. I've always believed in it. I have no fear of death. I have a fear of how I'll die. I don't want to be bludgeoned to death or set on fire. I think that probably happened in previous lifetimes. But what comes after it, I don't know why, but I was born with a knowing, not a remembering, a knowing, and anything about what happens after we die, like I can't get enough of. And over and over and over, not one of those people who have had, and there's millions, go on YouTube, there's millions of accounts of people who have had near-death experiences, very verifiable. It's not, there's too much evidence to say it's just the brain misfiring. If you believe that, you haven't really listened to people who have had near-death experiences, because the proof they come back with of conversations taking place, thousands of miles away, because they thought of their sister and their mind only meant there's so much evidence that it's not just a brain misfiring. But every single one of them, none of them met the judgmental, angry God that today's Christianity seems to want us all to believe in. Of course, because he's very scary. And when we're scared, we let other people control us. I can say that not once, even people from thousands of years ago, some people in the Bible, they met a God of such love, such acceptance, such beauty, that the only judgment they said comes from themselves, which is exactly where it's coming from now. All this judgment, it's coming from inside ourselves. It's not coming from a God. So I guess to wrap this up, what I'd like to say is, if you're someone who is firmly enmeshed in the traditional patriarchal religions, not interested in anything else, good for you, man. If that works for you, that's fine. But I ask you why you feel a need to force that down everyone else's throats. Ask yourself that. Why? Because you've been trained to believe that's the truth. But why do we have to believe it? If you're responsible to your God, why do you need us to affirm that? Go your way, we'll go ours. And when we get to the other side, we'll find out, won't we? What's what? Okay. And the other thing is, if you're someone who is now maybe starting to ask questions, this is a place for you. This is why I did this, so that women especially can explore and get inspired by each other, because I absolutely believe spirituality should be inspirational, not instructional.
Mhm.
I don't believe there is one thing that the divine creator source, whatever it is, needs from us. No ritual, no special clothes, no incense. We do all that for ourselves.
Mhm.
This energy source, creator source, doesn't need any of that. But if it comforts you and helps you get in a good place,
Do
to
it. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, go for it, whatever you need. So anyway, okay, we're gonna wrap this up, Siri. Let you have the last few words.
Yeah, what came to my mind when you were saying was there's two forms of authority. There's external authority and internal authority. And external authority is necessary, especially when we're little and we're learning how to navigate the world and we're learning about faith and religion and who we are. And at some point, though, what is so great is when we're taught to listen and nourish our own inner authority, and that's been denied us. And I think that's why it's so scary for people when we talk about things that do sort of challenge their worldview. And the Bible is because that's an external authority, and they've put like 100% of their eggs in that basket. And but when you've learned to cultivate and have your own personal relationship and your own, cultivate the inner authority of what is true for me and what do I experience in a way that I deeply know, it's less threatening when the external world starts to change and you're able to let some of that go. And so that's something that I want for all people is that they learn to trust their own inside thoughts and feelings and desires, at least trust them enough to explore them instead of just immediately dismiss them as being bad or wrong, which a lot of people are taught. And then practice learning to find that sovereignty, that inner authority, which God gave you. We've just denied it for so long.
All right. And anyone who is starting a journey or in the middle of a journey to find a truer spirituality for yourself, it's scary. Keep walking. I'm telling you, the light on the other side is beyond description. So, Siri, where can people get a hold of you, find out more about you?
You can go to siristrommen.com and learn a little bit more about me. And I also have a YouTube channel that's Siri Strommen.
All right. Thanks so much, Siri. Until next time.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.